Welcome, friends. Glad to be with you again. This is Economic Update. My name is Richard Wolff. This is a program about the major economic events, items in the news, important issues confronting all of the people in our audience. We come to you every week thanks to the Pacifica Network, and it is my pleasure to talk with you each week. I want to begin today by reminding you that if you're interested in the kinds of analysis that I present on this program every week, then I invite you to go to my website, rdwolff.com, where all of this kind of work is continuously posted, available for you at any time, and it's a way to follow what we do in our hour here when you have your leisure and you can spend a little time at it. We also have a second website, democracyatwork.info, which also presents the kinds of solutions to economic problems that we are particularly interested in. And both of those are available to follow the work that we do. As your host, Richard Wolff, I've been a professor of economics all my adult life at a raft of American universities. I currently teach in the graduate program for international affairs of the New School University in New York City. I also write regularly for various websites and especially for truthout.org, a really courageous and unusual website that I urge you to visit to see the kinds of work that complements and supplements what I try to do here on the program. Finally, please keep sending us your comments and your questions. Send them to either of our two websites, rdwolff.com or democracyatwork.info. We use your questions and comments to shape our programs, the content, the order of events, the priorities, and we also try to answer 2 or 3 questions each hour in response to the effort you put in that we appreciate sending that to us. So let me begin today by saying that there's a theme today, and it has to do with taxes, which is because we've just ended another season. Lots of you have had to file your income taxes recently. In the United States, April 15th is that time. And so I'm assuming that taxes, which are always on our mind, are perhaps especially on our mind now. So we will talk about taxes for much of the program. But we'll begin, as always, with short updates about things I think you will find important and interesting. It has become a scandal over recent years, the last 25 years, that the top officials of major corporations are paying themselves wild pay packages. First it was in the millions, then it was in the tens of millions, now it's literally in the hundreds of millions, and recently billions of dollars in a one-year payout to people at the top, particularly of the finance industry. And there's a pushback around the world, not in the United States, but in many other parts of the world, and I think people in the United States, people in Australia, people anywhere should be aware of these efforts and think about replicating them. I'll start with Switzerland, which arguably has gone the furthest. And it's interesting because Switzerland has a finance industry that is extraordinarily important to it. Here's what the Swiss already did. They passed in a referendum something called the Fat Cat Initiative. And it has to do with what are called golden handshakes and golden parachutes. A golden handshake is finance speak for giving someone a bonus who takes a job in your bank or your hedge fund. And a golden parachute is giving a person a bonus when they no longer work, when they leave your enterprise. So it's an extra kind of largesse, you might say, to people already earning at the top. And here's what it said. Shareholders are going to have a say in deciding how big these things are. And they're not going to be possible for a corporation to do without getting shareholder approval, and there's serious fines if anything like that is done without shareholder approval. So successful was this ballot initiative in Switzerland in getting mass support to put this first of its kind limit on how much you give to these top officials of the big corporations, that Swiss activists are now building a new campaign, which is to prevent executives from being paid more than 12 times the lowest paid worker's annual income. For comparison, here in the United States, the average relationship between a CEO, a top executive, and the lowest paid is counted between 300 and 400 times. The Swiss want to maximize it at 12 times. In neighboring Germany, the leaders of the major political parties have announced to the Chancellor, Angela Merkel, that exorbitance cannot be allowed in a free and socially minded society, and therefore they're putting the question of executive pay on the agenda for Parliament to decide. Imagine that. A democratically elected Parliament is going to decide how much executives can be paid, rather than allowing the exorbitance, as they call it, to continue. The Dutch government in Holland took an interesting step. It just announced new legislation in the works that would cap golden parachutes, that is the bonus you give an executive when he or she leaves their top position. Put a cap on it. You can't give a golden parachute worth more than 75,000 euros, or roughly in U.S. currency, $98,000, much less than is very often done. And finally, the French president, François Hollande, has also begun to do this. His argument is that the executive pay at state-controlled companies, the French government is the major shareholder in about 26 large corporations. And in those corporations, the plan is to not allow an executive to get more than 20 times the lowest paid worker. Again, a very small gap compared to that in the United States right now, where it's 300 to 400. So you can see that there is all kinds of movement. I can't take the time to give you all of it, but the movement is in the air everywhere, but of course not in the United States, or to be fairer, not yet. My second comment has to do with an apology. I made a mistake which several of you emailed to us to correct, and I appreciate that. In my mistake, I referred to Cyprus as having a 0% corporate tax rate, a 0% tax on corporate profits. That was an error of mine. The actual rate was 10%, and as part of Cyprus's new imposed self-destruction economically, they're having to raise it to 12.5%. My mistake came because I was lumping together Cyprus, a place where hot money was hidden, and the Cayman Islands in the Caribbean, another place where hot money is hidden. In the Cayman Islands, the corporate profit tax is 0, which is one of the reasons so much money is hidden there. Cyprus, at 10%, was lower than anywhere else in Europe, or at least as low as anywhere else in Europe. So that was one of the reasons it was attractive, but it wasn't a 0%, and I want to thank those of you that pointed that out. Third item. In the city of Chile last week, hundreds of thousands of young people and old people took to the streets, demanding, in some of the biggest demonstrations seen in Chile in many years, free quality education for all Chileans. In other words, their response to the noise about austerity, about cutting back, about raising taxes on people, was responded to by a statement, oh, please don't cut us. No. Oh, please don't cut us as much. No. Instead, a counterattack. We demand free quality education for all the people of Chile as a basic commitment of this society. 150,000 people reported in the city of Santiago. The people of Chile are responding to austerity in the way that gives the best chance for preventing the spread of that peculiar injustice. Third update for today. Taxes. Told you we were going to be talking about taxes. Conservatives would have you believe that taxing the rich, the people at the upper end of the income tax situation, is somehow controversial, that the United States is somehow doing something inappropriate or excessive, that we shouldn't be taxing the rich. and that what the president did was significantly tax the rich by raising it this last January 1 from the 35% top bracket to 39.6%, a very small increase to say the least. So I asked myself, how does the top tax rate that we apply to the richest Americans compare to the top tax rate on income in other countries? And to be fair, I put together the top tax rate of the federal government with the top tax rate applied by any state. The state in the United States that taxes the highest rate is California. So I put together the 13% roughly California on top of the 35% charge in the United States in 2012, the last year for which we have comparable statistics. And I said, if you put together the federal and the state in the United States, how does that compare to the top bracket, combining state and federal if the country has that, or just federal if it doesn't, of other countries? I am now going to list to you the results. I got this information from something called the Tax Policy Center. It is a project of the Urban Institute and the Brookings Institution, two very well-reputed, well-known, long-standing research outfits based in Washington, D.C. And there was a report done by James Nunn V about how income tax rates compare among countries. So here it is, folks. This is a list of the countries who apply a higher tax bracket to the richest people among them, those with the highest income. They apply a higher tax rate than the United States, even when we add the federal tax on income and the state tax. Get ready, it's a long list. Iceland, Germany, Australia, Canada, Israel, Ireland, Italy, Portugal, Greece, Finland, the United Kingdom, Austria, Japan, France, Spain, Netherlands, Belgium, Sweden, and Denmark. Every one of those countries charges higher tax rates to their highest income people than do the United States. Think about it. The next time someone tells you that we tax rich people in some extraordinary way, it's quite the contrary. Final short update for today. I came across a report issued last week by the United Nations agency UNICEF, which is in charge of children's affairs and has been doing wonderful research and wonderful help to children for as long as there's been a United Nations, since the end of World War II. Last week, they produced a report dated April 2013, and the name of the report, if you're interested in following up on it, is called Child Well-Being in Rich Countries, a Comparative Review. It compares how children are doing across a whole list of criteria. It's all explained in the report. And then they rank rich countries for how they do. And I thought you might be interested in some of their findings. They looked at 30 countries, or to be exact, 29. The United States was fourth from the bottom in the quality of children's care, children's well-being. In other words, there were three countries that were worse for child well-being: Lithuania, Latvia, and Romania. But the United States came in fourth from the bottom. That is extraordinary. The United States ranked second from the bottom in child poverty rates. The only rich country that had more children in poverty relative to the population was Romania in the Balkans. Interesting also, two countries have become the first countries in the world last year to begin regular monitoring of early childhood development. The state makes sure children are taken care of. Those two countries, Canada and Australia. For United States citizens, this is an astonishing report on what is and what is not being done in the United States. Let me turn now, at this part of the program, to the longer analyses of important topics that you've asked me to do some work on. And I'm going to start today with the program about Social Security. And the reason I'm doing that is the last couple of weeks have been abuzz in the United States with the plans of the Obama administration, the proposal in Obama's new budget that has to be discussed and decided in the Congress, of course. But the proposal there is to change Social Security in a way that, in effect, and everybody's clear about this, will reduce the amount of money paid out to Social Security recipients, the tens of millions that we have in the United States, compared to what they would have gotten if the changes being proposed had not been adopted, if indeed they are. To explain this, let's remember what the Social Security system is. It's very, very important. The Social Security system was begun the last time capitalism collapsed in the United States during the 1930s. Unlike the austerity program today, unlike cutting back help to the mass of people that we're doing now, in the 1930s, the Democratic Party government of Franklin Roosevelt created the Social Security program. For the first time, came to people over 65 years of age who had given a lifetime of work to this society and said, we're going to give you a decent amount of money in a check every month to give you a minimally decent retirement. It's our paying back to all you've given. And it's a sign of a decent society that takes care of its people. And the way Roosevelt got it passed through a Congress, and the way it was set up, was a system called pay-as-you-go. Basically, the money taken out of people's checks goes into the government, which turns around and pays that money out to the old people, those who have a disability of a certain kind, survivors' benefits, the set of beneficiaries, but they're mostly people over 65. Pay-as-you-go, money taken out of young people as they work through their lives is put aside and paid out to old people. So if you're a young person, you pay in, and then when you get older, you draw out. That was the way the system was set up, pay-as-you-go. And the idea was partly to make it clear to our people, this isn't welfare, this isn't charity. This is a pension that the government is operating for you. It takes money out of your paycheck, sets it aside, so that money is then made available to you when you retire. And the only thing the government is to do, if ever there was an excess money coming in, or while they were waiting to see what would happen, they would invest the money by lending it to the United States government, earning some interest, so there would be more money earned on what was taken from your check, to be available to help you when you became older. And let's be clear, the help isn't just to those that are over 65. Because if you're a decent person and you have an elderly mother, father, uncle, grandfather, you would help them. Even if you're a young person with a family, those are your parents, those are your relatives, those are the people that cared for you. So by the government helping people over 65, it's helping everybody, because it relieves some of the pressure on younger people to help the older people when they have all they can do to take care of their families as younger people. So it's a service to the country, paid for out of people's checks. Something, however, changed, and this is a key part of the story. Something changed back in the 1980s. The government began to raise the rates of withholding for payroll taxes, they were called. Money for Social Security is called a payroll tax because it's taken out of literally the payroll, taken out of the check you get. That payroll tax for Social Security was raised, and the amount of income to which that raised rate was applied was raised. And the bottom line meant that over the 1980s, the 1990s, and the first decade of this century, the Social Security was bringing much more money in every year than was needed to pay out to the eligible older folks as they retired. This is crucial. During the 80s, 90s, and the first decade of this century, this is what happened. Two things were happening to the federal budget. The United States government was cutting the income tax rates on the richest Americans. In the 50s and 60s, it was 91%. In the 1970s, it was 70%. And thereafter, it was dropped dramatically to the 35% it was last year. So if you drop rates on wealthy people, much less money is coming into the government. But that didn't happen because at the same time that the taxes on the rich were reduced, the payroll tax, that is the same for everybody. It's not like the income tax. It doesn't hit rich people with a higher rate. It hits everybody with a flat rate up to a maximum. And if you earn a lot more than that, which rich people do, you don't pay on anything above the maximum. For example, today, the maximum is $113,000. Whether you earn $10,000 or $50,000 or $113,000, you today pay 6.2% of it in payroll tax. If you're rich and you earn much more than $113,000, every dollar above $113,000 you earn, the payroll tax is zero. The richer you are, the lower the percentage of the tax, payroll tax you pay. It's not a progressive tax, it's the opposite, a regressive tax. So my point, over the 80s, 90s, and the first decade of this century, the progressive tax on rich people was cut. And the tax that affects everybody, the regressive tax, the payroll tax, was increased. That's a fundamental tax injustice. But now let's follow what happened. Social Security was taking in way more money than it needed to pay out. What did it do with the money? And if you understand this, you understand high finance in America in a way you should never forget. The Social Security system took the extra, and how much was it? Hundreds of billions of dollars. Today, the trust fund of the Social Security system is approaching $3 trillion. So these enormous sums were lent to the government. That's right. The United States government used that money for whatever it needed money for. Fighting wars abroad, maintaining our roads, helping college students, all the things the government does. The Social Security regressive tax system that hit middle and lower income people more than upper income people was in fact paying for it by lending all that money to the government. So where are we today? Over the last few years, the Social Security system has not brought in as much money as it once did. In a minute, I'm going to tell you why. But first, let's look at what that means. The money coming in is now just about equal to the money going out. And starting in the next few years, it's not going to be enough because the number of old people in this country is growing quickly, much more quickly than the number of young people coming into the labor market to pay in. But the system is still all right because it gets interest on all that excess Social Security payments that were coming in the 80s, 90s, and the first decade of this century. So the federal government is paying the Social Security interest on the money it borrowed from Social Security, and that money makes it easy, at least until the year 2021, so a good 7-8 years from now, before the Social Security system won't have enough money coming in from its interest and from what we're all having deducted from our checks to pay the older folks as they need it. But what's beginning to happen is pretty soon the trust fund is going to have to be paid back. The interest plus what's being taken out of people's checks won't be enough, starting in the year 2021 or so. At that point, the trust fund money will have to be paid back. But of course, the government doesn't have it. It spent all that money that it borrowed. So how's the government going to pay back Social Security so the old people can be taken care of, having overtaxed everybody for 30 years? Answer: they're going to fight it out in the government. They're either going to decide to tax people, to raise the money to make good on what they have to pay out in Social Security, or they're going to cut government programs and take the money, instead of giving it to, say, college students or road maintenance or fighting wars, they'll take care of the Social Security obligations. Or here's a third possibility to scare us. They may start cutting what the Social Security people get. Maybe worse. They'll raise the rates on the younger folks who pay in further. They're in a jam because of the way they've handled Social Security. And why? Is it a malfeasance or a bad thing of the government? Not at all. The government that cut the taxes on the rich was under enormous pressure from the rich to do that. The rich paid the political parties, they paid the politicians, legally, illegally, through lobbying, through public relations. They got the tax structure to drop on rich people's income tax and to whack the middle and lower income with ever higher payroll taxes, siphoned over to the government, and now they don't want to pay. Will the American people permit this? That's the only basic question. To continue on our theme of taxes, but with a different tax, let me raise for you the following conundrum, the following mystery of the American tax system. And this has parallels in other countries, so it applies in many places. The argument goes like this. If you own a house, and I'm going to use the United States as an example, but again, it applies elsewhere. If you own a house and you rent the house out in the United States, you are subject to two kinds of tax. The rental income you get from renting out the house, whether it's a room in your house or the entire house, doesn't matter. The flow of rental payments you get is your income. And in the United States, you have to pay a tax on that income like you pay a tax on most of the rest of your income. Income tax applies to the rent you get from your house. That's one tax. A second tax you are required to pay is a property tax. In whatever town or city your house that you're renting out, wherever it's located, that city or town has something called a tax assessor who decides what the value of your property is, and then you pay a tax, a percentage of the value of your home as a property tax. So you clear with me? If you have property that generates income to you, like a house that you rent, you pay income tax on the income it generates, and you pay property tax on the value of the property. Okay? It's important to keep clear about housing, because if people own any property in the United States, the vast mass of working people own no property, but if you do own some property, it's probably land and a house, more likely than anything else. So now let's turn to the kind of property that's mostly owned by the rich. The property is called stocks and bonds, shares of companies. Bonds are loans that you have made to a borrower who pays you interest. Let's see how the tax code of the United States handles this kind of situation. The income you get from a stock or a bond, dividends, interest, capital gains, that kind of income is subject to tax, just like a rental is if you have house or land. But, and here's the crucial difference, the value of the property, in this case the property of stocks and bonds, is not subject to tax in the United States. Let me say that again. The value of the property is not subject to tax in the United States, just the income. In other words, we treat the property of a house differently than the property of stocks and bonds. House property is taxed as property. Stock and bond property is taxed zero, not at all. The income a house generates is taxed, just like the income a stock or bond generates is taxed. But the value of the property isn't. Wow. In the United States, as an example, if we taxed property in stocks and bonds at a minimal rate, 1% a year, it would immediately eliminate an enormous portion of our annual deficit. In all the talk about deficits and government debt and how we have to deal with it, and all the hand-wringing and all the gestures, no responsible politician in this country has stepped forward to launch a campaign. What in the world are we doing with a tax system that privileges the property of the rich, stocks and bonds, no tax on that property, but goes after the property in land and homes, which is the only broad-based property we have in the United States? Where does that come from? How is that justified? As we take our short break, I ask you to think about that, and I'll be back with you in a moment. Welcome back. This is Economic Update. I'm Richard Wolff, and once again, I want to remind you that if you're interested in the kinds of reports and analyses that I offer here, you might also find interesting the website rdwolff.com, where all of these kinds of arguments and presentations are presented with facts and figures, with elaborate analysis. It's a way to follow what we do on this program at your leisure, at no cost, in a way designed to make it maximally usable by you. If you're interested in the notion of how to solve these problems, you might also be interested in the other website, democracyatwork.info. And at both of those websites, you will be invited to sign up for a free newsletter, comes out every month, that also amplifies all of this material and is available to you free of charge if you are interested. Okay, we were talking about taxes, and we're going to talk a little more about taxes since we're in the second half of April, which, at least in the United States, is tax on everybody's mind time. Today's story is going to be about taxes in the state of Alaska. That state is away from the continental United States, separated by Canada in the far north. And in order to explain the marvelous or infamous developments of the tax situation of the state of Alaska, I need to tell you a little bit about that state. The single biggest industry in Alaska, economically speaking, is oil. The oil industry employs about a third of the working population of that state. It dwarfs any other industry as a result. Because the oil companies are enormously profitable there, make an enormous amount of money, put the state at enormous environmental risk. Some of you will remember the Exxon Valdez oil spill of some years ago, which caused unspeakable damage that still is a problem for that state. They're at risk of all kinds of problems now. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline is a continuing source of risk and danger. This is a state that has paid heavily for the benefits that come from being a part of a very profitable oil industry. Here's some of the benefits that the oil industry has paid to get the government of Alaska to help them get all that profit out of that oil. There's no sales tax and there's no income tax in Alaska because the oil companies pay a royalty tax on all the oil they take out of there. They still make a fortune as a result, but it's a way of getting the support of the people there to let them do it. There's even a foundation to which the oil companies contribute that pays out a subsidy. Average family of 4 in Alaska in recent years has gotten about $5,000 a year, a check, as a kind of a dividend, if you like, paid out. The oil companies make a fortune, but they make sure in these ways to help the people of Alaska to keep this cushy arrangement whereby they can get all this profit and have all this environmental risk hanging over that population. However, this kind of largesse from a corporation always has limits and always has risks. In the go-go days, when the company tells you, well, you won't have to pay taxes, well, we'll give you several $1,000s a year, everything may look golden to the people. But always remember, in an economic system controlled and dominated by large corporations, your benefits exist at their pleasure. And the state of Alaska just found out. Here's the issue as best I can understand it. Several of the major oil companies busy in Alaska have decided that they can make more money cashing in on the oil shale projects that are causing a lot of tension in the United States about building that pipeline from Canada into the south of the United States and so on. Their oil companies are seeing profitable opportunities elsewhere. And when corporations see profitable opportunities elsewhere, they have the following habit, which was exercised in Alaska. But I'm going to mention, when I finish my story about Alaska, about plenty of other places where the same game is played. The oil companies went to Alaska and said to the government there, well, you know, we really would like to stay here, and we'd really like to pump oil here, and we sure have made a lot of money. But, truth be told, we can make more money pumping someplace else. So we're not going to invest in finding more oil around here the way we had planned, and pumping more the way we had planned. We're not even going to maintain what we've been doing. We're moving somewhere else. And as they allow the message to sink in, first to the politicians and then to the public, everyone understands what it means. Fewer jobs in the oil patch. Maybe less money coming in from the oil. Turns out if you don't run as much oil through the Trans-Alaska pipeline, the risk of there being ruptures and spills that are environmentally dangerous goes up. And maybe that fund will give less to Alaska families or nothing at all. Then the oil companies allow the other shoe to drop. You know, they say, if you would reduce the amount of money we have to pay into the state, the amount of money that has allowed you to get away with no sales tax and no income tax, well, maybe we'd rethink this. In other words, if you make it profitable by cutting our taxes sufficiently so that we don't have to move somewhere else to make more money, which is what we're going to do, well, then we'll stay. And the political leadership of the state of Alaska understood the message, as most political leaders do. They don't need it spelled out. They know this game. I'm just going over it in case anyone doesn't know, to make sure it's out there in the open. So the state of Alaska has just proposed a $750 million tax cut for the oil industry. How nice. Here's to understand. That money has to be coming from someplace. Either Alaska will continue to do what it's been doing for its people, and then it'll have to raise the $750 million from the people of Alaska, or they'll cut programs for the people of Alaska and use the $750 million they no longer spend helping the people of Alaska to give more profits to the oil companies. If you let your fortune be determined by a private corporation whose number one priority is profit, that's what you get. Punchline. Every state in the United States is always in this situation that Alaska found itself in. Every city practically in the country is. Here's a scene that unfolds in City Hall, mayor's office, across the country. It's happening in dozens of mayor's offices as we speak. Local company is announcing, we're thinking of leaving Mayor Jones because we can have cheaper workers someplace else, or we can get a cheaper rental someplace else, or we can avoid this kind of problem someplace else. But of course, Mayor Jones, we might stay here if you built a bridge so our workers could get in and out quicker, or you cut our taxes, Or you provide us with a subsidy for hiring high school graduates from the area. You make it worth our while, or we're going to hurt the people of this community. It's blackmail. It's economic blackmail. No pretty way to describe it. And the mayor, afraid of what it might mean if jobs are lost, if a factory closes, he'll lose the election. He'll look like he didn't do something. He has to do something. What is he going to do? So he does pretty much what the leadership of Alaska wants to do. Caves in. He dare call the bluff. He has to say to the company, okay, I'll give you this. Would this be enough? As long as the decisions of corporations are made by people whose job it is to make the most money, they'll play one city against another, one state against another, and as we have seen in the world, one country against another. If the decisions weren't made by small groups of people, boards of directors, whose first loyalty has to be to the owners of the company, the shareholders, the major shareholders who select the board, if that wasn't making the decision, they might be able to take into account the larger population they serve, the larger population who works in their enterprises, the larger population that makes the system work. They couldn't blackmail them. And until we make that kind of change, we're going to be on the wrong end of the pressure from companies. They'll go here when the profit is highest and leave the debris where they once were. And when they get time to move again, when the profit opportunities arise, they'll do to the town they went into just what they did to the town they left last time. This country and the world is littered with abandoned enterprise zones because the corporations found a more profitable way to make money, which is what they're about. Not the social development, not the community development, not the needs of the majority of the people, but the profits of a tiny minority. So we have to take cognizance of the Alaska story as the latest installment of a long, painful process of a modern capitalist system, and one that deserves a lot more critical attention than it has gotten. I'm going to turn now, as we often do towards the later part of the program, to deal with either questions about workers' enterprises, workers' co-ops, or to respond to your question. I want to answer a question about workers' co-ops that many of you have sent in and I think deserves an answer. In my judgment, there will always be people, as many of you believe there will be, who for a variety of reasons don't want to be in charge of the place where they work. They don't want to share control, decision-making, power, authority. They really just want to come to work, do their job, and go home. That's what they want. I accept that. In my judgment, I question it because I think it's an accommodation to the way capitalism works. If you, your friends, your associates, your parents have a long history of working in a place where the people who run the show don't know who you are utterly uninterested in what you have to say about the business, don't ask for your opinions, don't admit it when they make mistakes, if that's what you're used to, it isn't very strange that you develop a habit which says, I go, I do my job, I go home. I don't like these people, I don't want to stay here, I'll do what I have to earn my pay. It's an adjustment to a system as it works. My hope is, and my belief is, that the majority of people, if we change all of it, if we say to them, no, you can be listened to, you can be a part owner, a part director of this enterprise. You don't just play the role of order taker. You're also now going to play the role of order designer and order giver. And you're going to be giving as often as you're getting. And the people who give you orders will also be people to whom you give orders because you'll be cooperating. I think that will bring people in to a full participation. I think it'll make them happier and healthier to do that. We are not drones. We are human beings with hopes and dreams and ideas and initiatives and enthusiasms. And we ought to have a workplace organized to take advantage and to give us a chance to explore and develop all those capabilities. But I admit that there will be some people who don't want to, or some people who have an emergency at home that takes more of their time and energy, and so okay. And I think the way a co-op would handle that is the following. There will be leaves of absence. And it'll be interesting in a co-op, because we might be willing to say in a co-op, and that's, of course, for the co-op to decide, like all those questions are, that's what it means to have a cooperative, worker, self-directed enterprise. But I would hope that many co-ops would say, okay, you can take a leave. Here's 6 months, a year, and you'll be required to come to work, but you won't have to participate in the direction. When there's a meeting for direction, you get time off. And then there'll be other people who, because they have a family emergency, an elderly person who needs care, a new child, all those leaves will be given to different people, including the kinds of leaves we're used to, and now the kinds of leaves that will help a person perhaps make a transition from the kind of, I do my job, that's it, I go home, to I'm part of a cooperative enterprise where my thoughts, my hopes, my ingenuity is appreciated, valued, and used. So I don't think it's an either-or. I don't think we're going to be rigid and never let people participate in a co-op unless they do all the directing work too. We'll help people make the transition. We'll allow leaves. Of course we will. Because the whole point of a worker self-directed enterprise is to make the work process more humane, more gentle, more encouraging, more work as a place where you develop. You don't just produce a product. Work also produces you, the producer. And we should be just as concerned to develop you as we are to develop the product. And you know, if we do that, if we develop you, then over your work life, you will make that product better too. It is a false economy of capitalism to subordinate workers to the kind of drone repetitive work most people are required to do. Because in the end, it damages the work process, it weakens the process, and it makes the output less ingenious, less creatively developed than it could have been if you did more to develop your workers and less to focus on that bottom line. Let me turn now to some questions in the final minutes of today's program. Here's a question that comes and says, I would appreciate it if you could suggest a few publications or websites where I can find credible information, journalism on politics and economics today. I haven't completely abandoned mainstream media, but I'm finding it increasingly difficult to take it seriously. Amen, brother or sister. I see your point. I would mention a group of them to start off with. Among financial newspapers, major global newspapers that cover financial news, the one I would recommend, as far and away the best, is called the Financial Times. Comes from Great Britain, but time after time, for coverage of the news, not the editorials so much, but for coverage of the news, the Financial Times, which also has a website that you can go to, is the one I would recommend the most. I believe the quality there is really number one in terms of a daily newspaper coverage of economic and financial news. Of a more critical approach, I would recommend 4 websites that you consult probably on a daily basis if you can. The first one is called M as in mother, R, Zine, M-R-Z-I-N-E. MR actually stands for Monthly Review. The Monthly Review, which has been coming out every month as a magazine since 1949, is an extraordinarily well-done repository of critical economic and political analysis. I think you would find the articles published every day on the MR Zine valuable. Truthout.org, which I mention on this program because I write for them often. I also sometimes write for the MR Zine, but not as often. The Truthout.org is another such source. Two that are more focused on economics that I would recommend are one, EPI. Economic Policy Institute is what EPI stands for. EPI.org, a Washington-based research outfit. Excellent reports on economic issues from the kinds of perspectives you will not get in the mainstream. And the final one, Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, cbpp.org. I believe it could be .com. I'm sorry, I don't remember. But the CBPP website, like the EPI website, is an extraordinarily useful compendium of economic analysis, often nicely worked out with good charts and statistics backing up what they say. I think you would find them, this collection of 5 items, particularly useful. And while I don't mean to be immodest, take a look at my own website, rdwolf, WOL2Fs.com, and democracyatwork.info. You will see more of this kind of material, and you'll also see references to other sources that you can also pursue. Another question that was asked. In World Trade Organization disputes between the United States and Europe, the Europeans often claim that U.S. military spending is really a subsidy to American industry. Please explain. Yes, Europeans, but many others around the world, claim that military spending in the United States is a kind of subsidy. The reason has to do with what Dwight Eisenhower, the President of the United States many years ago, famously referred to as the military-industrial complex. The cozy relationship between the Pentagon, which spends hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and the companies, large, medium, and small, that sell to the Pentagon every year. Everything from uniforms and vehicles to bullets and tanks and airplanes and aircraft carriers and rockets and all the rest of what the Pentagon buys. They have to negotiate contracts. And the history of the Pentagon's contracts is not a history that makes you very confident, because it's a history of grotesque overpayment, of what used to be called cost-plus contracts, where basically the Pentagon pays a company the cost of whatever they say the cost is, plus a markup for their profits. Make a long story short, the argument of our trading partners is that one of the reasons the American companies can often sell their products cheaply abroad, undercutting competitors in other countries, is because they make over-profits on the overpriced commodities they sell to the Pentagon. So that in this way, the Pentagon gives an advantage to companies by paying them too much so that they can undercharge and beat their competitors in world markets. It's a kind of dumping, the word used when you sell abroad a price below what really you ought to charge if you were playing the game fairly. By the way, the United States makes accusations of this kind of behavior of other countries, so it's not as though we're the only one getting such an accusation. We also make them. But it is the argument of many people who believe that the United States defense budget, which is the largest defense budget on this planet, nobody else comes even close, that this is therefore a major factor in providing hidden subsidies to the United States and giving the United States an unfair advantage relative to other countries who either don't have a military program or have one much, much smaller and therefore unable to match, even if they overpay their producers, the kinds of hidden subsidies here. Final question for today. Is military spending inflationary? In other words, is the money you spend on military goods inflationary? And the answer there is, as with all government spending, maybe, but not necessarily. It's important when you think about inflation to remember this. Inflation means the prices of goods go up. It is therefore never the case that if you simply see more money in the economy, either because the government prints more or banks, by their mechanisms, create more, whatever the reason, you shouldn't reason if you see more money, you will see more inflation. It's possible that with more money, prices will go up. Let me give you an example. If the government of the United States were to fly airplanes over the largest cities in America and drop money out, we would all run around with our envelopes and our baskets collecting that money, and we would try to spend it. Understood. That's true. We would run into town with all that extra money. And then the merchants, knowing about this, would have a choice to make, wouldn't they? They could say, wow, with all the people coming in with more money, you know what we're going to do? Raise the prices. Then more money would have created an inflation. But there's an alternative. The businesses may say, with all those people coming in, I'm going to order more goods to be made and shipped to me so that I can sell more. In that case, the more money produces more production, gives more people jobs. Then the money has a good outcome, not an inflationary outcome. It depends on how the society and the economy work, which result you get. And that's the important thing to keep in mind. Thank you for being with me. This is Economic Update. I'm Richard Wolff. I look forward to speaking with you again next week.